Alright, this is the video where I explain the 4 most important yogas of Vedic astrology. I'm offering a new report called The Houses of Life. And this report evaluates and explains each of your 12 houses and each subtopic of each house. So let's talk a bit and let me share some of the techniques and systems that drive this unique report. So let's start off our explanation of the 4 most important yogas of Vedic astrology by explaining what a yoga is in the first place. The word yoga means combination. It's based on the word yug, or yug, which means two. And to yog something means to do this, to put things together. So in astrology, it refers to when you get combinations of things together. Basically, in astrology, everything is a yoga, like a planet and a sign. The planet, the sign, the yoga. Venus, Scorpio, Venus and Scorpio. Those are very, very basic. When we use the word yoga, we're generally referring to things which are more complex. Like, for example, a planet in a sign and a house. You might be wondering why yoga usually means this or that. Also, because yoga also refers to sadhana, or practice, in the sense that this is your goal, and this is you, the practitioner. The yoga is what allows you to get to your goal. So in astrology, what are the more complicated combinations that we're talking about? What are the 4 most important combinations that pertain to the houses? Well, the first one definitely is the Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga basically means the yoga of eminence. The Raja Yoga shows where you really shine. So it's the area in life in which you can easily succeed or naturally succeed. That's hands down the most important yoga in Vedic astrology, period. Another very, very crucial and super basic yoga is the Mahapurusha Yoga, which shows some quality that you have that allows you to become a great person. The third most important house yoga, I don't know if it's in order, but this would be the Daridra Yoga. There's many different definitions of what the Daridra Yogas are. I'll show you the one that I'm using in my house report, and that I think is the simplest. I'll show you a very simple one that's very important to use as the counterbalance of the Raja Yoga. And then finally, the 4th one that we'll look at today, and what I would say is the 4th most important yoga, is Parivartana, which means the exchange. So where Daridra shows you where you're likely to have flaws and difficulty, and Raja Yoga is the opposite, where you have greatness and it's natural or easy for you to succeed. And Mahapurusha is showing particular prominent characteristics of your personality. Parivartana, the exchange of houses, is showing how certain areas of life fuse and link. So, one by one, let's go through and I'll teach you how to identify or find these yogas in a chart, and also how to score them or evaluate them. And we'll use Priyanka Chopra's chart to illustrate Mahapurusha, Elizabeth Taylor's chart to illustrate Parivartana, Angelina Jolie's chart to illustrate the Raja Yoga, and Marilyn Monroe's chart to illustrate the Daridra Yoga. So we have a star-studded lineup. Now, for the house exchange, the Parivartana, these house exchanges occur with this formula. Lord of house X is in Y, and the Lord of house Y is in X. So can you find that yoga in this chart? You would look around. If you'll see a planet like Saturn, which is in its own sign, that cannot do a Parivartana Yoga, cannot do a house exchange because it's in its own sign. So look for another planet that's not in its own sign. Moon's in Scorpio. So where's Mars, the owner of Scorpio? Is it in Cancer? No. So that's not doing a Parivartana Yoga. Look over there at those bunch of planets in Pisces. Jupiter owns Pisces. what sign is Jupiter in? I find it in Leo. Is the sun the owner of Leo in Pisces or Sagittarius? Yes. So we're getting a fuse or link or circuit formed between this 4th house and this 9th house. Now, how do you evaluate this as to whether this is a good thing, a bad thing, a medium thing? It's determined by the type of the house that's forming the link. So if there's a trine house involved, it's going to be very positive. We'll quantify it as 100 score. Angles are also very positive, a little bit less than trines, 90. Then you have the middle type of house, 2 or 11, the money houses. Those will be positive too, but not as strong, 50. Let's quantify it as 50. 3 is neutral. Give it a 0. And then there's the Dustana, which is 6, 8, and 12. Those are negative. So quantify that as a negative 100. So you can judge the quality of the house exchange based on what houses are doing the exchange. If it's involving a Dustan, then it's got 100 negative points. If it's involving a trine, then it's got 100 positive points, etc. So in her case, it's the 4th house and the 9th house. The 4th house is an angle, so it's worth 90 points positive, and the 9th house is a trine, so it's worth 100 points positive. One side note, if 2 houses are the same type, then that's the most positive type of a Parivartana. So you would score that as 150 regardless of what type they are. So for example, if 2 Dustana's houses exchange, if she had Mars in Cancer and the Moon in Scorpio, then she would have the Lord of the 12th and the 8th and the Lord of the 8th and the 12th. So instead of scoring that as minus 100 and minus 100 because they're Dustans, the 2 Dustans are the same nature, so it's the most positive. So it's 150 and 150 positive if you connect 2 Dustans. If you connect the 2nd and the 11th, it turns out to be 150 positive. So then to just get a score for the house exchange, you just average the 2. And then you give it to the houses that are occupied by the exchanging planets. So in Elizabeth Taylor's chart, you get 95. The average of 90 and 100 is 95. And you give that 95% positivity to her 4th house and her 9th house. Even though Jupiter also owns Sagittarius, it's not bad for the 1st house for its lord to be in this great scenario. But the score actually goes to the houses being occupied by the exchange. But she's so beautiful, Yes, 4th house contributes incredibly to beauty. 1st house is also going to be blessed because this happens to be a Raja Yoga. Also, this happens to be a lot of other yogas, which are also going to give the blessing to the 1st house. Okay, that's Parivartana or house exchange yoga. A simple example. It's fairly simple yoga. Now let's look at the Raja Yoga, which can get a little bit more complicated. Again, this is the one that shows your eminence, where you really shine, where it's natural and easy for you to succeed. There's 3 ways to get Raja Yoga. The first way is if you get the lords of trines combining. So the trines is the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th. So for Angelina Jolie, it's Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So the lords are Moon, Mars, and Jupiter. Ooh, look at the 10th house. Moon, Mars, and Jupiter all combined. So there's instances of the trine lords combining. That is the most powerful type of Raja Yoga. And another type of Raja Yoga is if the trine lords combine with lords of angles. The third way that Raja Yoga is formed is through the nodes, Rahu and Ketu. If you get a node in the Kendra or the Kona, in the angle of the trine, then it could make a Raja Yoga. You don't see an illustration of that in Angelina's chart because she's got the nodes in 6 and 12. So they're not in an angle or a trine. There's no possibility that they can make the Raja Yoga. But let me show you Elizabeth Taylor's chart one more time. So let's start off by saying that Rahu occupies her 4th house. So the node is in a angle. So if it can combine with a trine lord, then that node forms a Raja Yoga. The trine lords are Jupiter, Mars, and the Sun, because she has Sagittarius ascending. So Mars is in the same house as her node. The Sun is in the same house as her node Rahu. And Jupiter is very strongly aspecting that node Rahu. I just wanted to flash that up on the screen so you could see an example of how a node can form a Raja Yoga. Let's talk about what we mean by a combination. Combinations can occur in three ways. The easiest, simplest thing is when the planets are in the same sign. Especially the closer they get, the more attention we pay to that combination. The other way that they form is by mutual aspect. That means one planet aspects the other, and the other aspects. X aspects Y and Y aspects X. And the stronger the mutual aspect, the more we look at it. And then the third way is by Parivartana, which we just explained. So actually, if you flipped Elizabeth Taylor's chart back on the screen, you would see that she also has a Raja Yoga. The 4th and 9th exchange is also a Raja Yoga. In the case of Rahu, it will just reflect the aspect back. So if any planet strongly aspects Rahu, then the reflection comes back. Consider it that way. So that's why Elizabeth Taylor's Jupiter strongly aspecting Rahu causes Rahu to have the Raja Yoga. All right, so this is how the Raja Yoga can form. If the lords of trines combine, if the lords of trines combine with angle lords, if a node is in an angle or a trine with the opposite type of lord. Now, how you score it? You just give 100 points of positivity per the yoga, and you give it to the house occupied by the Raja Yoga, the house that's hosting the yoga, and the house is owned by the planets doing the yoga. So let's see how this works in Angelina's chart. Take a look at the first lord, the moon. It's conjoined, obviously, by conjunction with Mars and with Jupiter. Mars is the 5th lord and the 10th lord, and Jupiter is the 9th lord. So how to score this is actually kind of confusing, but it's confusing in the level of, do we have 29 pounds of sugar here, or do we have 30? Basically, you got a whole lot of sugar. So moon is the first lord, is the lord of both an angle and a trine. It combines with another trine lord, Mars. Mars can also be counted as a second Raja Yoga because it's also an angle lord. Jupiter is another trine lord. So there's all kinds of Raja Yogas. We can say it's 2 Raja Yogas from the moon. And I also want to draw your attention to Saturn. Saturn, the 7th lord, so that's an angle. It can form Raja Yogas. It's not forming the yogas with Venus, because Venus owns the 2nd house and the 4th house. You don't get a Raja Yoga if you combine 2 kendras, 2 angles, only 2 konas. So it's not making the yoga with Venus, but it is making the yoga with those 3 planets in the 10th house. Because Saturn has a perfect aspect to 270 degrees to the 10th house point. And every planet has a 75% aspect to the 4th house point. So you can get a really strong mutual aspect by square with Saturn. Mars, on top of that, has a perfect 100% aspect to the 90 degree mark. So you have strong mutual aspect between Saturn and Mars, Saturn and Moon, and Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn being an angle lord, when it's in a mutual aspect with Mars, the trine lord, that's Raja Yoga, angle and trine combining. Mutual aspect with the moon, angle and trine combining, because moon is a trine lord, 1st house. Mutual aspect with Jupiter, angle and trine lord combining, because Jupiter is the 9th lord, angle lord. So we identified 5 Raja Yogas for Angelina Jolie. Let's see if we can evaluate or score them now. Basically, you got 200 points from the moon and 300 points from Saturn, and it's all going to affect her 1st house because the moon is the 1st lord and Saturn is in the 1st house. And the context of it is Venus, who's in the proximity. So this means that her first house has 500 points of positivity due to these Raja Yogas. I'm sure you can bet that it's also going to affect the 10th house strongly as well. But let's swing around to it, because don't forget about the houses that are owned by the Raja Yoga planets. So actually the 5th house, which is owned by Mars, gets benefit from all the Raja Yogas that Mars is in. Mars is in 3, so the 5th house gets 300. The 6th and the 9th, owned by Jupiter, they also get benefit from Jupiter's Raja Yogas. So Jupiter's in 3 Raja Yogas, the 6th and the 9th house get 300 benefit. 7th and 8th, owned by Saturn, get benefit from Saturn's Raja Yogas. Saturn is in 3, so 7 and 8 also get 300 points. So this chart is really starting to pulsate from the Raja Yogas that are in it. And then this 10th house, it's again going off the chart, like how many pounds of sugar is in this 10th house. It's hard to say, but it sure is a whole lot. The Lord has got 300 points because it's in 3 Raja Yogas, and then the house is hosting 3 Raja Yogas. So let's call it 600 points of positivity for the 10th house. And there's your example of how you evaluate and how you spot and find Raja Yogas in a chart. Now let's move on to this Mahapurusha Yoga, which is simpler. Mahapurusha, as the name implies, means this is a personal quality, or Purusha, which makes you noticeable or great. And you can have an inverse of it, and I'll explain how. The yoga occurs when you have a planet that's in a certain sign in a certain house. So the certain sign means a sign which confers good dignity, and a certain house means a house that confers prominence. So to be specific, the way that the Mahapurusha is most commonly defined, if the planet is in its own sign or its exaltation in an angle, then you have Mahapurusha. It's both easier and more inclusive way to evaluate it is just to say the planet, which is in the Kendra, will affect the chart with its dignity. That's what the Mahapurusha is really telling you. So if the planet that's in the Kendra has a negative dignity, then you'll have inverse Mahapurusha. And this is mentioned in some classic texts as well. The way that you score the Mahapurusha, the way that I score it in the Houses of Life report, the way that I recommend you score it or evaluate it, is the score is equivalent to the dignity of the planet that's in the Kendra. And you award that score to the house occupied and the house is owned. So in Priyanka Chopra's chart, the two planets that are in the Kendra house is only Venus and Moon. This also tells you something about how you should read the Kendras, right? The Kendras are the central point in the chart. That's why they're called Kentra. I mean, it's Greek word for central. There's a central point, there's a center stage in the chart. The planets that are there get spotlight. She has only these 2 planets there, which are of the same type, feminine, beautiful. And they're in the first house body. So she only has Venus and the Moon in the Kendra. They're both in the first house. So they're going to contribute their dignity to the houses they own and the house they occupy. Luckily, they have good dignity. They both have 60 out of 100 dignity. Why? Because they are both very friendly to their host. They have natural friendship to the host. Both Venus and Moon have natural friendship to Mercury. And Mercury is next door in Cancer. So the natural friendliness improves to great friendliness. So that score is going to give 120 in the first house. There's 2 planets, each with 60 positivity in the first house. So her first house gets 120 points. And then the houses they own, the Moon owns the second house. So it gets the Moon's Mahapurusha value, 60 points. Venus owns the 12th and the 5th. So the 12th and the 5th get Venus's Mahapurusha value, which is 60. Finally, for today, I want to introduce you to Daridra Yoga, one implementation of it, and I explain how to use it and how to evaluate it. Daridra really means misfortune. So it's the opposite of Raja Yoga. It's showing where you get dimmed, not where you shine, but where you're dim. or not where you excel, but where you fall behind, not where you have excellence, but where you have flaw or mistake. As I said, there's many different types of Daridra yogas. The one that I'm teaching you about today, and the one which I consider to be the most important, is basically the counterbalance of Raja Yoga, or the inverse of Raja Yoga. It occurs when you get a house lord that combines with a Dusthana lord. So if any house's lord combines with the 6th lord, 8th lord, or 12th lord, it forms this misfortunate yoga. So in Marilyn Monroe's case, the 12th lord is combining with the 8th lord. Because Jupiter is the 8th lord, Moon is the 12th lord, and they combine together in one house in the 7th house. So we're not going to expect that she's going to have great marriages. Easy marriages, steady marriages. The way you score the Daridra Yoga is 100% or 100 points subtracted from the houses that the planet owns and from the house that the planet occupies. So you're going to take 100 points away from her 12th house, 100 points away from her 8th house, and 200 points away from her 7th house. But that is not correct, actually. The but is Dustan lords combining with other Dustan lords is positive. Or the combination of Dustan lords in a Dustan house is positive. So Jupiter owns the 5th and the 12th. One is a Dustan, one isn't. Its combination with the 12th lord is positive for its Dustan house, but negative for its non-Dustan house. So it subtracts 100 from the 5th house. It gives 100 to the 8th house. And then the house which is occupied by Jupiter also loses 100 because it's occupied by the Dustan lord. And as for the moon, when it combines with the 8th lord, it's good for the 12th house, but not good for the 7th. So the whole roundup of the way you score this Daridra Yoga here is her 5th house and her 7th house are the worst for it, but her 8th house and the 12th house are the better for it. So there you have it, my simple, clear, direct explanation of the 4 most important yogas in Vedic astrology. I hope that you absorb all this information, because these are really important contributions of Vedic astrology to the whole art and system and technique of astrology in general. And to clearly understand them and how to use them is really essential to be able to do astrology in a clear, authentic, systematic way. I hope this helped you better understand at least one of the techniques and systems that's involved in this great new report of mine, the Houses of Life. If you want to see how these things come together for you, then go to victakara.com/H and order your own report today. Thanks very much.